Booker asked Bondi the question she had already been fired for not answering. She had already been removed from office. Bondi had been in the limousine with the president the day before the news broke. The public imagery of that proximity, the attorney general in the presidential motorcade, was the image of an official in good standing in the inner circle, protected by proximity to power. Then the next morning, the reports came. She would be leaving the position. The stated reasons were vague or absent, the kind of departure announcement that names no cause and invites no follow-up from an administration that does not explain its personnel decisions. She was out. That is the context that Senator Cory Booker brought to the witness table when he looked at Pam Bondi across the hearing room. Not the context of someone questioning a sitting attorney general about ongoing institutional decisions. The context of someone questioning a former attorney general, already fired by the president she had been protecting, about why she had continued to protect his interests while she was still in the position he eventually took from her. He had made this argument before in the Patel hearing. You do what is asked. You absorb the criticism, you protect the president, and then one day you become inconvenient. He was watching the completion of that pattern in person across a hearing table. Booker had been in this room before. He had questioned Kash Patel about institutional destruction, about the 14-year recovery timeline, about the loyalty that runs in one direction. He had watched the pattern complete itself with predictable precision. You do what is asked. You absorb the criticism. You protect the president. And then one day you become inconvenient. Patel was still in his chair. Bondi had already been moved to the other side of that pattern. He looked at her. He had 3 subjects. They were not chosen randomly. Booker's approach to this hearing room is different from the binary questioning technique that senators like Kennedy deploy. Kennedy arrives at questions through confirmed facts. He establishes each element, confirms it, establishes the next, and arrives at a question that has no comfortable escape. The witness is cornered by the logic of confirmed facts before the final question arrives. Booker builds a moral and institutional architecture. He places facts inside a framework that names what they mean before asking the witness to respond to what they mean. This is not a softer technique. It is a different kind of pressure, designed for a different kind of accountability. Kennedy asks what happened. Booker asks what it says about the institution and the people who ran it. The distinction matters for the Epstein question specifically. The binary question. Did Epstein hang himself or did somebody kill him? Produces a yes or no answer that is either confirmed or denied. That technique is effective for establishing what the official position is and whether it has changed. Booker was after something different. He was not primarily interested in what the official position was. He was interested in why the official position had been so carefully managed for so long, by whom, and at whose benefit. Those questions require a different framing, one that places the witness inside the pattern rather than simply before a binary. Booker was not just asking about the Epstein documentation. He was asking why a fired former attorney general was still protecting it. This channel tracks the documentation as it moves through the legal system. If you want to follow where this goes, subscribe and turn on notifications. New videos drop when the record produces something worth documenting. Let's start with where Booker started, the institutional pattern before the Epstein question arrived. He walked through Strzok and Page, not as a political grievance, but as a documentary record. The affair, the anti-Trump communications, the specific text message, no, he won't, we'll stop it, which the Inspector General had concluded showed evidence of political bias in an active federal investigation. The firings, the lawsuit, the settlement. Booker confirmed each element with Bondi methodically. Did you review the Inspector General's findings on the political bias? She had. Did the IG find that the communication showed bias in an active investigation? That was correct. Were they fired? They were. Did they sue? They did. He asked about the settlement that followed. The Merrick Garland-era DOJ settlement that resolved that litigation for a combined figure. Who authorized it? She said the prior Department of Justice. He asked who specifically in the prior DOJ. She said a settlement of that nature would have come from the Attorney General. He asked, so Merrick Garland made that decision? She said her understanding was that a settlement was agreed to. Booker noted the passive voice. A settlement was agreed to. Not Garland agreed to a settlement. The accountability evaporated between the active and the passive construction. The decision had an author. The passive voice removed the author. He noted that and moved forward. Then the laptop. Hunter Biden's laptop. The New York Post story in October 2020. The 51 intelligence officials who signed a letter characterizing the story as having the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. The FBI had possessed the laptop for 10 months at that point. Booker confirmed this sequence with Bondi. He asked, did the FBI know before the election that it was not Russian disinformation? She confirmed the FBI had the laptop. He asked who at the FBI made the decision not to tell the American people the truth about what the laptop contained before the 2020 election. She said she did not have that information in front of her. Booker looked at her. He said, "I would like a name, not a division, not a unit, not a prior administration. A specific individual, a person who made a specific decision at a specific time with specific consequences for the public's understanding of a contested election. Someone who reviewed the available evidence and concluded that the American people would not be told." He said, "That person exists. That decision was made by a human being. I want to know who." She said she would look into it. That commitment, on the record, documented in the transcript, sits next to the question it responded to. Either it produces a name or it produces a documented failure to produce one. Booker understood both outcomes. That is why he asked for the person and not the process. Then he arrived at Epstein. The pattern was established in the record. Passive voice. Named decisions without named decision makers. Near future without dates. Now the largest version of that same pattern. Before he asked the central question, he did something Kennedy's version of this exchange did not do. He named where Bondi was sitting and what had happened to her. He said, "You ran the Department of Justice. You managed the Epstein file releases. You appeared before this committee and other committees and answered questions about the documentation. You absorbed every accusation. You ran interference for an administration that eventually fired you. And now you're sitting here after the firing, and I want to understand something. Are you still protecting the files for a president who no longer employs you? Or are you now free to tell us what's actually in them?" That question has a specific legal weight beyond its rhetorical force. A sitting attorney general testifying before Congress can invoke executive privilege, deliberative process privilege, and the institutional authority of her office to decline certain questions. A former attorney general testifying before the same committee in the same room occupies a different legal position. The institutional authority is gone. The executive privilege claims that depended on active service to the executive are substantially diminished. What remains is the individual's personal legal exposure, their own Fifth Amendment rights, their own potential liability, and the institutional loyalty they choose to maintain voluntarily after their employment has ended. Booker was pressing into that distinction. The protection Bondi was still offering was no longer institutionally required of her. It was, at this point, a choice. The room held with that framing in the air, not because it was dramatic, because it was precise. Bondi had been fired. That is a documented fact. The circumstances of her departure from the DOJ, the timing, the stated reasons, the absence of stated reasons, are part of the public record. She did not resign. She was removed. The question Booker was posing was not rhetorical. It was structural. The institutional protections that officials invoke to justify withholding documentation are typically tied to active executive interests. The current administration's ongoing legal exposure, the current president's political interests, the department's ongoing operational concerns. Those interests exist and have legal weight while the official is actively employed by the administration asserting them. When the employment ends, the analysis changes. A former attorney general does not carry the same privilege protections as a sitting one. The executive privilege claims that Bondi could have made while serving the administration are substantially weaker now that she no longer serves it. The deliberative process privilege that protects internal agency communications from disclosure does not extend indefinitely to former officials testifying about their decisions after leaving office. Booker was pressing into that gap. The space between the institutional language Bondi was still using and the institutional standing she no longer possessed to back it up. Bondi was still in the chair, still offering the same deferrals for the benefit of an administration that had already moved on from her. Booker was asking whether that fidelity was something she was choosing to maintain or something she was simply continuing by habit. Now let's examine the 4 documented anomalies of the night of August 10th, 2019. She was already fired. She was still deferring. The near future had been arriving and producing nothing for 5 years. The anomalies are the reason why the deferral matters. Each one is documented. Together, they are the question the documentation has not yet answered. The security cameras. Jeffrey Epstein died in a cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. He was the highest profile federal prisoner in the country at that moment. He was awaiting trial on federal sex trafficking charges that would have required him, had the trial occurred, to give testimony under oath about the most powerful people connected to his operation. Names. Dates. specific acts. The kind of testimony that cannot be managed through legal strategy once it is delivered to a jury. On the night of his death, the security cameras covering the area outside his cell were not functioning, not damaged by a known event, not under scheduled maintenance with documentation of the maintenance window, not functioning. The footage that would have captured anyone entering or leaving the relevant area during the period in question does not exist. The official explanation was a technical malfunction. That malfunction occurred on that specific night in that specific location for that specific prisoner. The guards. 2 guards were assigned to check on Epstein every 30 minutes. Both guards fell asleep at the same time, during the same shift. For a prisoner who had previously been placed on suicide watch after a prior incident, both of them, simultaneously. The logs. The guards who fell asleep falsified the records to indicate that the checks had been performed. They documented check-ins that did not occur. Federal officials falsified official records about the monitoring of a federal prisoner. That is not a characterization. It is what the subsequent investigation and prosecution established. The removal from suicide watch. Epstein had been placed on suicide watch after a prior incident. He was removed from that watch before his death. The clinical documentation supporting that removal. The basis on which a determination was made that this specific prisoner, in this specific context, with this specific history, no longer required the heightened monitoring of suicide watch, has not been made fully public. Those 4 things are in the same federal record. Each one is a documented failure. Booker laid them out for Bondi one at a time, with the specificity of someone who had read the Inspector General report, who had reviewed the court filings, who had sat through the congressional testimony of officials, who had tried to characterize each failure as isolated and unrelated to the others. He said, I want you to tell me, with the full record in front of you, what the Department of Justice's position is on the accumulation of those 4 things, not on any single one of them, on all 4 of them together, in the same place, on the same night, for the same prisoner. Bondi said the official determination was suicide. She said the department was working through the full documentation release in a way that protects victims. Booker looked at her. He did not move immediately to the next question. He let the answer sit in the room. Then he asked about Dr. Michael Baden. Baden is not a fringe figure. He is a former chief medical examiner of New York City with decades of professional standing in forensic pathology. He has served as an expert witness in major federal cases. He has been called on by courts, by congressional committees, by state governments to examine physical evidence and reach documented professional conclusions. He was hired by Epstein's brother to conduct an independent examination of the body. His findings focused on specific injuries to the neck. He documented fractures of the hyoid bone and the thyroid cartilage, structures in the throat that can break under the force of strangulation. His specific claim was that the pattern and character of those fractures were more consistent with homicidal strangulation than with suicidal hanging. In suicidal hanging, the primary mechanism of death is typically asphyxiation or cervical fracture from the drop, not the kind of manual pressure fracture pattern Baden described. He was not speculating about motive or actor. He was applying the specific technical language of forensic pathology to the physical evidence and reaching a professional conclusion that differed from the official one. He did not say Epstein was murdered. He said the physical evidence was more consistent with homicide than with the official finding. That professional disagreement between a former chief medical examiner and the official death determination is part of the documentary record. Booker asked whether the DOJ had examined that disagreement. Bondi said they were working through it. The Department of Justice's position remained suicide. Bondi had just stated it under oath. The independent forensic expert hired by the family reached a different conclusion. Both of those things are in the same documentary record. Booker asked, has the Department of Justice conducted any review of the independent forensic findings? Has any government pathologist been asked to examine Baden's specific claims about the fracture patterns? These are not abstract questions. They are administrative questions about whether a specific thing happened, whether the agency responsible for the official determination of cause of death reviewed the findings of an independent forensic expert who reached a different conclusion, and if so, what the review found. A yes answer produces the next question. What did the review conclude? A no answer produces a different question. Why not? Either answer is part of the accountability record. Bondi's answer was neither. Bondi said they were working through it. The phrase working through it is not neutral. It is significant precisely because of what it concedes. If the documentation did not exist, the answer would be different. There is nothing more to release. The record is complete. Working through it means there is material to work through. There are federal files that have not been released. There are determinations being made about what is producible and what is protected. Those determinations are being made by the institution whose conduct the documentation examines. The Department of Justice is deciding what evidence of its own performance is relevant enough for public release. Booker named this directly. Working through it. 5 years. Every near future that didn't arrive. Now, post-firing, the same phrase. Booker named what that phrase actually concedes and why the process behind it requires external scrutiny. He said, the relevance determinations are being made by the institution under review. That is not an independent process. A court can determine relevance. A special counsel can determine relevance. A congressional committee with subpoena authority can determine relevance. The DOJ determining what documentation of its own conduct in the Epstein case is relevant to public interest is an interested party making a determination that requires independence. Then he returned to the personal argument. 4 anomalies. An independent forensic report. Working through it. Near future. And the person responsible for all of it had already been cut loose. She had been fired. She was still protecting the documentation. He needed her to explain the gap between those two facts. He said, you were fired. The president you were managing these files for made the decision to remove you. And I am sitting here watching you use the same language, the same deferrals, the same near future framing that you used when you were serving him. And I need you to help me understand what you are still protecting and for whom. Near future. That is the phrase that has preceded every deferral of Epstein documentation since his death. Near future in 2020, near future in 2021, near future in every hearing where a senator asked when the full record would be public. Each near future arrived and produced a partial release, a further categorization of sensitive material, another round of litigation about what the statute required and what executive privilege permitted. Booker asked, what does near future mean? What is the date? What is the condition that, when met, will result in the full documentation being in the public record? Bondi said they were working through it in a way that protects victims. He said, I believe you care about the survivors. I have watched the survivors sit in hearing rooms for years. I have watched them extend patience and grace to an institution that has not treated their documentation with the urgency it deserves. The protecting victims framing is legitimate when it applies to victim identifying information, but it cannot be the justification for withholding documentation about security camera malfunctions and guard falsifications and suicide watch removal decisions. Those are not victim identifying information. Those are institutional performance records. Bondi said the department was being thorough. Booker said the survivors have been thorough. They have been thorough for 5 years. They have been patient with every near future that did not arrive. They filed lawsuits. They cooperated with investigators. They gave testimony under conditions that required them to describe in detail, in legal and official settings, what had been done to them. They fought in federal court to unseal documents that had been sealed under protective orders during the original proceedings. They won some of those fights. Specific court orders that required the unsealing of specific documents, the release of specific depositions. They received those releases in pieces over years, each piece producing the next legal battle over what remained sealed. They submitted to the exposure of their own experiences in courts and in congressional hearings and in the public record. They did every institutional thing that people seeking accountability through official channels can do. They used the legal system the way the legal system is designed to be used. They filed the motions. They attended the hearings. They waited for the orders. And at the end of each process, the documentation was still incomplete. The near future was still coming, and the people responsible for producing it were still working through it. They have sat in rooms like this one and watched officials use the same language you are using right now to explain why the documentation has not yet been released. And they are still here, and they are still waiting. Then he made the argument that the Booker version of this exchange exists to make. He said, I want to be direct with you. You ran the Department of Justice for more than a year. You managed the Epstein file process during that time. You appeared before Congress and told us you were working through it. You absorbed the criticism from members of this committee who told you that you were protecting the files for political reasons. You said you were protecting the victims. You did everything that was asked of you, and then you were fired. The president cut you loose. That is the documented record of what happened, he said. And I am asking you now, sitting here after that firing, whether there is anything different you want to say. Because the reason I ask is this: you are no longer serving that administration. Whatever obligation you felt to manage this process in a way that served their interests, that obligation ended when they ended your employment. You are sitting in this room as a private citizen who formerly held this position, not as a current official with ongoing institutional obligations to protect active executive interests. The survivor's interest in this documentation did not end when you were fired. The public interest did not end. The 5-year pattern of deferrals did not end. The documented anomalies from the night of August 10th 2019 did not resolve. The Baden findings did not become less significant. The security camera footage remained absent. All of those things persisted past the date of your termination. Only your employment ended. So I ask you, is there anything in those files that you believe the American people deserve to see that you did not release while you were in that position? Bondi said the department's process had been conducted appropriately. She said the near future release would be comprehensive. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said the documentation of what happened in that cell on August 10th, 2019 is still incomplete. The security camera footage does not exist. The guards' logs were falsified. The forensic record is contested. And the institution responsible for resolving those questions has been describing resolution as imminent since the question was first asked. He said, the survivors have waited 5 years. They have been more patient than this institution deserves. The least this committee and this country can do is keep asking the question until the answer carries a date and not just a phrase. Booker yielded. The survivors have been waiting since August 10th, 2019. Through every near future, every working through it, every committed to release that produced a partial disclosure and another round of litigation about what remained sealed. Booker had sat across from Kash Patel in a different room and made the same argument about a different person. You do what is asked. You absorb the criticism. You protect the president. And then one day you become inconvenient. He watched that pattern complete itself with Patel still in his chair. He watched it again here with Bondi already on the outside of it, still performing the same institutional fidelity that had not protected her. Two different people, the same architecture of loyalty, the same endpoint. The documentation is still incomplete. The pattern completed for Bondi. The question remains open for the record. Near future means no date. It always has.